Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that an inspired mother helped create a church organization that has blessed millions of children and families around the world for nearly 150 years? Learn how, on August 11, 1878, Aurelia Spencer Rogers gathered with parents in Farmington, Utah, to begin the Primary Association, one of the most beloved organizations in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Learn how the first primary meetings were held on Saturday afternoons and how the older children served as monitors, encouraging younger children to obey their parents and treat others with kindness. Discover that the children also learned practical skills, sang songs, participated in gardening projects, and even raised money to help build temples, support hospitals, and care for those in need.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think about how a society goes about building, modern infrastructure. Like, a city council will spend years meticulously debating a new highway system, laying out the power grid, zoning the commercial districts.
Right, you plan everything out.
Exactly. They build a massive university, they plan for the economy, they plan for the adults, and they plan for the teenagers entering the workforce. But imagine they cut the ribbon on this multi-billion-dollar metropolis, people move in, and suddenly someone looks around and says, wait a minute, where are the elementary schools?
They just completely forgot them.
Yeah, they built an entire functioning society and just completely forgot to create a structured space for the youngest residents.
That kind of infrastructural blind spot happens much more often than we think, especially when a community is operating in pure survival mode.
Which these early pioneer communities definitely were.
Oh, absolutely. The immediate overriding focus is always on utility. The community leaders are looking at who can hold a shovel, who can harvest the crops, who can defend the town. Designing a holistic ecosystem for children usually falls right to the bottom of the priority list when you are just trying to keep the town from collapsing.
Right. Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring a fascinating historical moment where someone finally noticed that massive blind spot and, decided to build the missing foundation.
It is a great story.
It really is. So we're looking at the origins of the Primary Association of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For those of you listening today, this is a global youth organization. We're talking over 1 million children participating worldwide. It is incredibly structured, highly influential, and yet it all traces back to one specific moment. August 1878, in a tiny frontier settlement called Farmington, Utah.
Yeah, and to really grasp the magnitude of what happened in Farmington, we have to view this history through the lens of grassroots community organization. Because this isn't just a timeline of events.
No, not at all.
It is a masterclass in how a single individual identifies what sociologists might call a system gap, like a massive unaddressed need within a population. And then they engineer a solution that manages to last for centuries.
So let's talk about the population of Utah in the mid to late 1800s. Because the demographic data from the 1880 census paints a picture that is, almost hard to comprehend today. By 1880, a staggering 44% of Utah's population was under the age of 14.
44%. Compare that to modern demographics, where we usually see that number hovering around maybe 18 or 19% in the United States.
Right.
Nearly half of the entire territory was composed of children. And in a frontier agrarian society, high birth rates are a practical necessity. You need large families to sustain the demanding labor of family farms.
Of course.
But that creates a secondary, often unforeseen crisis. You have this enormous restless energy source with virtually no formal structure to contain or direct it.
Just, walk down the street of your own neighborhood in your mind for a second. If every other person you passed was a child under 14, the sheer noise level alone would be chaotic.
Oh, it would be deafening.
And the leadership of the church was very aware of this demographic wave. President Brigham Young had already started creating programs, but his focus was entirely on the older youth. He explicitly referred to them as restless teenagers.
Right, the pragmatic needs of a pioneer community pretty much dictated that organizational triage.
Yeah, so looking at the timeline, in 1867, they organized Sunday school programs primarily for youth and adults. Then by 1869, the Young Ladies Department was formed. That was in the parlor of the Lion House in Salt Lake City.
Which eventually evolved into the modern Young Women's Program, right?
Exactly. And then in 1875, Brigham Young directed a man named Junius F. Wells to establish the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association. It's like a city building a massive state-of-the-art university system and high school sports leagues, but completely forgetting to invent elementary school.
That is exactly what it is. And I understand why they prioritize the teenagers. If you are trying to build a civilization out of a harsh desert environment, you need the older kids organized. Brigham Young even noted in the historical record that they wanted the young men enrolled and organized so the community could put their hands upon them at any time for any service that might be required.
Service that might be required. That is very telling.
That quote highlights the sheer utility of those older demographics. I mean, a 16-year-old can haul timber, they can manage livestock, dig an irrigation ditch.
String telegraph lines, yeah?
Exactly. The formal organizations for young men and young women were essentially civic infrastructure. They were being actively trained to assume heavy adult responsibilities. But the younger children, those under 12 or 13, just didn't have that immediate utilitarian value yet.
Right, they couldn't do the heavy lifting, but they still consumed resources and they were still just running around the settlements. So without a formal community structure like the older kids had, the burden of guiding these younger kids falls entirely on the family.
Almost exclusively on the mothers, actually.
Yes. The historical accounts point out a specific moment where Bishop John W. Hess of the Farmington ward addresses this in a meeting. He publicly noted that the responsibility for the moral, spiritual, and behavioral guidance of these younger children rested almost entirely on the mothers.
And you have to consider the daily reality of a 19th century pioneer mother. We aren't talking about modern parenting struggles of, balancing corporate work and soccer practice.
No, not at all.
These women were managing homesteads without electricity, no indoor plumbing. They were churning butter, carding wool, spinning yarn, producing clothing from raw materials.
Just endless physical labor?
Right. Hauling water, preserving food without refrigeration, cooking over wood stoves, all while raising massive families in a really harsh climate. They were performing the physical labor of 10 modern professions simultaneously.
So true.
Expecting them to also design and provide a rigorous, structured moral education for half a dozen young children in their non-existent spare time was just a logistical impossibility.
And that impossible burden is the catalyst for our story today. So, we jump to 1877. A woman named Aurelia Spencer Rogers is sitting in the Farmington ward listening to Bishop Hess talk about this incredibly heavy responsibility placed on the mothers. And she takes it deeply personally.
She really internalizes it.
She does. She spends time observing her community, engaging in considerable prayer, and she finally articulates the core problem. She notes that there was an auxiliary organization for all ages except the children.
And articulating the problem clearly is always the necessary first step in solving a system gap. She recognized that the adults and the teenagers were being formally trained to use their time wisely and contribute to society. But the youngest demographic was completely overlooked.
Yeah, she wrote about her profound desire that something more could be effectuated for the cultivation and improvement of the children morally and spiritually.
It was very clear vision.
But I have to push back on how this actually unfolds from a practical standpoint. Because we are talking about the 1870s here. This is a highly structured, patriarchal frontier society where internal cohesion was literally a matter of life and death.
Oh, absolutely.
So how does a regular person in the 1870s just go about launching a massive organization? I mean, does she just start a club in her backyard?
Well, no, and that is what's so brilliant about her approach. She navigated it by completely respecting and utilizing the chain of command. It really serves as a masterclass in diplomacy and institutional change.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When Bishop Hess initially asked if she would be willing to preside over an organization for the children, she admitted in her own writings that she felt willing but very incompetent. She didn't act as a rogue agent trying to disrupt the system. She worked within it.
Right.
After counseling extensively with her local bishop, she was directed by the First Presidency of the Church to meet with Eliza R. Snow to further discuss the matter.
Now, for those who might not know, Eliza R. Snow was an absolute powerhouse at the time. She was effectively the most influential woman in the territory, heavily involved in leading the Relief Society and the Young Women's organizations.
She was highly respected.
Yeah, getting a meeting with her to pitch a new program is essentially like pitching your startup idea to the most powerful venture capitalist in your industry.
That's a great analogy. And that meeting provided the crucial validation Aurelia needed to move forward. Eliza R. Snow sent a letter to Sister Rogers in August of 1878 that cemented the initiative.
What does she say in the letter?
She wrote, "The spirit and contents of your letter please me much. I feel assured that the inspiration of heaven is directing you, and that a great and very important movement is being inaugurated for the future of Zion.
Wow. That letter is an ironclad endorsement. And it opens the door for Eliza R. Snow to take the concept directly to President John Taylor of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Right, taking it to the very top.
And he gives the official top-level approval for Aurelia to organize and preside over the First Ward Primary Association in Farmington. Crucially, he also grants permission for these children's meetings to be held on a day of the week other than Sunday.
And with the institutional backing secured, the real grueling work begins. Having a brilliant idea and securing permission is only the first 10% of the battle. The remaining 90% is pure execution.
Execution is everything.
Exactly. So Aurelia calls two counselors, Louisa Haight and Helen M. Miller, to help her build this from the ground up.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because this is the part of the story that absolutely blows my mind. The pure, unadulterated shoe leather hustle of these three women is incredible.
It really is.
They don't just stand up in church on Sunday and make a casual announcement hoping people show up. In August 1878, they physically knocked on doors to visit every single child's home in the entire Farmington ward.
And the physical toll of that localized campaign cannot be overstated. Picture the setting in August of 1878. There are no paved roads, no telephones, no digital blasts or, neighborhood group chats.
No air conditioning either.
Right. They are walking miles in the intense late summer heat, covered in the heavy clothing of the era, visiting isolated farms and homesteads. And at every stop, they have to pitch a completely unprecedented concept to busy, exhausted, and likely skeptical parents.
And they managed to personally contact 224 children in just over 2 weeks. 2 weeks! Think about the messaging and persuasion required for that.
It is a massive undertaking.
You are asking pioneer parents to give up their children's labor, even if it's just minor chores around the farm like weeding or feeding chickens. You're asking for a few hours on a Saturday so they can attend a brand new program. You have to sell the value proposition incredibly well to get that kind of buy-in.
Well, the value proposition was clearly something the community was starved for, because the launch metrics defy modern statistical probability. On Sunday, August 25, 1878, they held the very first primary meeting. And out of the 224 children they had contacted during their grueling door-to-door campaign, 215 children attended.
Wait, 215 out of 224? That is nearly a 100% conversion rate.
Yeah, it's roughly a 96% conversion rate.
If you launch any community program today and get a 96% adoption rate in your first week, you own the market. But wait, now you have 215 highly energetic frontier kids between the ages of 6 and 14 all stuffed into a local meeting house. That sounds less like a successful launch and more like a recipe for a localized riot.
It does, doesn't it? Managing a crowd that size with that much restless energy requires deeply sophisticated organizational psychology. If Aurelia and her counselors had just stood at the front of the room and tried to lecture them for an hour, the program would have collapsed into chaos on day one.
So what did they do? Break them into smaller groups, I assume?
Yes, she split them into distinct age groups. But what's fascinating here is the genius move of appointing the oldest child in each group as a monitor. Their specific job was to encourage the younger children to be obedient to their parents and kind to one another.
Oh, I want to dig into the mechanics of that because it's brilliant. Think about it. If you have a room full of adults trying to police the behavior of a bunch of 13-year-olds, you instantly create an adversarial dynamic.
Naturally, yeah.
The young teenagers will just want to rebel against the authority figures. But if you take those same 13-year-olds and make them the authority figures over a group of 7-year-olds, you completely flip their psychological script.
Exactly. You bypass the rebellious instinct by fulfilling their psychological desire for autonomy and respect. By making them monitors, Aurelia gave them direct ownership of the program's success.
That is so smart.
It installed a profound sense of internal governance. They weren't just being managed by adults. They were learning how to lead, how to nurture, and how to take responsibility for their younger peers. It acts as a behavioral scaffolding, where the older child translates the adult expectations into a language the younger child actually respects.
And we have to look at what they were actually teaching these kids, because the behavioral guidelines from those early Saturday meetings are incredibly revealing. Beyond the foundational religious lessons on faith, prayer, obedience, and punctuality, they had rules that specifically addressed the gritty realities of 1870s frontier life.
The everyday rules offer such a fascinating window into what was actually troubling the local community at the time, because it wasn't purely abstract theology.
Far from it. The boys were given explicit instructions not to take fruit from orchards and melon patches.
Right.
And the girls were sternly warned not to hang on wagons. Just highly specific 1870s behavioral guidelines. It paints this vivid picture of pioneer children just being absolute neighborhood menaces to local agriculture and transportation.
While those rules might sound amusing or quaint today, they highlight the serious sociological implications of idle youth in a survival economy. A pioneer settlement relies entirely on its agriculture.
Yeah, every calorie counts.
Exactly. If roving bands of bored kids are stripping the local melon patches or damaging the orchards, they aren't just being a nuisance. They are actively threatening the community's fragile food supply.
And the wagon rule is just as serious, really. Hanging onto the back of moving, horse-drawn wagons was essentially the 19th century equivalent of kids playing in heavy traffic.
It was incredibly dangerous.
A child slipping and falling under a heavy wooden wagon wheel in a town with very limited medical care is a catastrophic tragedy. It devastates a family and it halts community progress. So these weren't just arbitrary rules to make the kids sit still. This was highly practical civic management disguised as Sunday school.
It was entirely about teaching children to respect the physical and economic infrastructure of their town. They were learning that their personal behavior had a direct, measurable impact on the survival and prosperity of their neighbors.
That highly practical, community-focused approach is likely why the program scaled so rapidly. Because the Farmington experiment was an undeniable triumph. There's actually a beautiful mural in the local meeting house today that commemorates that initial gathering.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. But the concept didn't stay localized. Because it was so successful, primary groups began flourishing across various settlements in Utah.
And that rapid expansion forced the curriculum to evolve holistically.
Yeah.
It couldn't just be an hour of rule recitation if it was going to hold the attention of thousands of children across an entire territory.
Right, they had to mix it up.
They began integrating music deeply into the program, forming primary music bands. Aurelia noted that this was specifically to cultivate a love for music and a love for all things beautiful in a world that was often very harsh and dusty.
And they brought in gardening projects, lessons in home arts, and public recitations. But the detail that stands out the most to me is how they turned these children into active economic contributors. They actually started holding primary fairs to raise money.
And the fundraising aspect completely changed the identity of the children within the larger community. Hard currency was incredibly rare on the frontier, so they were finding creative ways to generate value, growing produce, creating crafts.
And they weren't keeping the money.
No, they weren't raising this money to buy toys for themselves. They were raising capital for temples, for hospitals, and to provide aid to the poor, turning these kids into active civic contributors.
Think about the psychological impact of that on a 10-year-old. You are no longer just a dependent mouth to feed. You are an active stakeholder in the community. You helped fund the hospital where people are healed. You helped feed a struggling family down the road.
It changes everything.
It builds a profound, unshakable sense of self-worth and civic duty.
That mechanism, teaching children that they have the capacity to improve their world right now rather than waiting until they reach adulthood, is the core philosophy that has sustained the organization for nearly a century and a half.
Yeah.
Modern iteration of the program associates this with the concept of be what I believe.
Right, like the video and song, meaning your actions are the ultimate undeniable proof of your internal convictions. If you believe in kindness, you don't just sit in a circle and talk about it, you go out and raise funds for the poor.
Exactly.
If you believe in respect, you protect your neighbor's orchard instead of stealing from it. The whole point of the organization, from Sister Rogers' time to today's 1 million plus members, is teaching children that their actions are the ultimate proof of what they believe. The lessons are explicitly designed to translate moral instruction into physical, tangible action.
The scale has changed dramatically since 1878, growing from those original 215 kids to over 1 million members globally today, but that underlying mechanism remains identical. The foundational premise is that the habits of civic duty, moral responsibility, and peer mentorship formed in childhood become the permanent architecture of an adult's character.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Take a second and look at the foundation of your own life. Think about the communities or groups that shaped you when you were young. Who are the people in your past who gave up their Saturday afternoons, who knocked on doors, who essentially built the elementary school of your moral or professional development?
It is a great question to ask.
And in what ways do your actions today show what you believe, just like those kids were taught in 1878?
I challenge you to take that reflection one step further based on these historical accounts. Aurelia Spencer Rogers lived in a bustling, complex community. She looked at a fully functioning society that had carefully planned resources for adults and organized programs for teenagers, and she managed to spot the one massive demographic blank spot that everyone else had normalized.
Yeah, she saw what everyone else missed.
Consider your own industry, your workplace, or your local neighborhood today. Who is the modern equivalent of those forgotten children? Where is the infrastructural blind spot that everyone else is walking right past? And more importantly, do you have the courage to knock on 224 doors to build something for them?
Building something that lasts a century doesn't usually start with a massive budget, a fancy title, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sometimes it starts with having the humility to notice who is being left behind and the sheer grit to knock on doors to build a space just for them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep seeking out the fascinating stories hiding behind the institutions we see every way, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.